Hello, campers, dreamers, and babysitters. And as we near the end of Splatterthon, we had to give you some extra special content for your Halloween grab bag. We celebrated a Friday the 13th this month, and of course, like any good horror fan, comes a mandatory trip to Camp Crystal Lake. As I settled down for the evening, I perused my collection to see which installment I wanted to revisit this year. I took a look at the usual suspects, part 1, 4, 6. None really piqued my interest this year. I decided to go a little rogue. I was feeling a little rebellious, and I wanted to dissect an installment I don't usually pay too much attention to. Yes, that's right. We're talking Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. Not seeing this film in over 20 years, I only remembered bits and pieces, and the big narrative being, it's a bad movie. I gave it a watch, and then a rewatch, because is this movie better than I remember? But before we dive into one of the most divisive chapters in the Friday the 13th franchise, let's catch up with the gang and see where they're all at. Freddy's dead after some serious father-daughter issues when we learned about his family tree. Michael Myers is playing Uncle Knows Best with the Man in Black as he drinks Kool-Aid and waits for the Hale Bob comet. And of course, our 2 feet of terror with the red hair, Chucky, fell to pieces when he couldn't keep himself together after enlisting in the army. Which brings us to our boy, the Crown Prince of Crystal Lake. The last time we saw Jason Voorhees, he was doing the backstroke in the sewers of Manhattan. I only mention these prominent horror franchises because it's indicative of where the horror genre is in 1993. Audiences were still feeling a bit of a hangover from the slasher wave of the 80s. We would see Freddy or Jason more often than our extended family because there was a new release almost every year. As each installment was released, the returns became less and less. Horror fans were looking for that new subgenre that was going to make the hair on the back of their neck stand up. Horror in the early 90s was an interesting time of trying to see what new avenue horror fans wanted to travel down. We would later discover that road would be paved by Wes Craven with his meta awareness of New Nightmare and Scream.
What's your favorite scary movie?
But before we can get there, we have to travel to hell for the final Friday. Jason Goes to Hell was released on August 13th, 1993, but 5-year-old Luke would have to wait to see it on VHS. Walking into my local video time, leading the charge to the horror section as my mother followed behind, there was always two Friday the 13th tales on the shelf. Jason Takes Manhattan, and of course, Jason Goes to Hell. Both I saw numerous times as a kid, but The Final Friday was always my first choice. Primarily because as a kid, the cover art was so terrifying. A hell serpent slithering its way through the iconic mask of Jason Voorhees had my young mind racing. Now, as an adult, looking back, it really does just look like a penis with fangs. Look at that veiny bastard. But I digress. Directed by Adam Marcus, The Final Friday was bringing a different flavor to an established and beloved franchise that had really done all that they could do. Being Marcus's directorial debut, tackling a film centered around a pop culture icon like Jason Voorhees had to bring a level of intimidation that most directors don't experience until way later in their careers. The Friday the 13th franchise was catapulted into pop culture prominence and had a very specific formula, a formula that Marcus set out to break. So let's take a look at Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. We start out like any other Friday the 13th film, at Crystal Lake, where a random woman is getting ready to shower and the lights go out. To no one's surprise, Jason Voorhees appears. But the difference here is that we divert all expectations. As Jason gives chase to our damsel in distress, so to speak, it turns out to be a trap as the FBI unleashes a barrage of bullets and eventually blow Thick Boy Jason to smithereens. Yes, Jason is bested, or so we think at the very beginning of the film, which can be a bit controversial for audiences, especially when fans came to see Jason Voorhees slash a bunch of sexually charged teenagers. To be honest, this concept takes a while to warm up to. As a kid and avid Jason fan, you don't want to see your killer be killed. Seeing the opening several times as an adult, I've been able to appreciate the abruptness of the creative decision. It keeps the audience on the edge of their seats, and for the first time in an over decade old franchise, we are asking ourselves, what the hell are we going to do for the next 80 minutes? Our answer is quickly given as Jason is taken to the city morgue. Looking a little more crispy than usual, local coroner Phil is in charge of deciphering what goes where now that Mrs. Voorhees' baby boy is in pieces. Working up an appetite, Phil only has a hankering for one thing. Oh, yeah, that ooey gooey heart of our machete wielding maniac. As Phil finishes his dinner for one, we are given our first taste of the supernatural element added into the final Friday as Phil becomes possessed by the spirit of Jason Voorhees. While watching this series of events unfold, I can't help but appreciate the different feel everything has, but also maintaining some semblance of the tone that made this franchise so iconic. Having Jason Voorhees on an autopsy slab while a coroner examines his dismembered corpse isn't something that I hit on my bingo card with this franchise, but it's just so much fun. As Jason escapes from the city morgue, he knows home is where the heart is, as he makes an immediate return to Crystal Lake. As the local diner, Joey B's, gets ready to profit off the death of Jason Voorhees, we are introduced to a handful of characters as we start to salivate at the potential body count we're in store for. These franchises have become synonymous with shallow character development, dropping a handful of new characters into a situation they're unfamiliar with, whether it's being a counselor at a new summer camp or a high school student on a boat trip to Manhattan. The Final Friday has a different approach, bringing the element of Jason into the already established lives of our characters. I'm not accusing the film of having these deep character moments or in depth backstories, but the attempt to give these characters deeper roots instead of just cannon fodder is noticeable. Creighton Duke is one of the most memorable characters in the franchise because of his ties to Jason and his motivation of being this Jason hunter. The idea of a character out for revenge on Jason has been touched on to a certain extent in Part 4 with the Rob character, although I feel that character was never fully given time for audiences to care for. Stephen Williams, who portrays Duke, brings so much charisma and mystery to the role. Having this motivation that we as an audience are never fully given the backstory to adds an expansiveness to the mythos of the Creighton Duke character. We aren't given all the answers, which I don't think we really need to understand the dynamic between Duke and Jason. We know something traumatic happened in the past, and we can get on board with just that little grain of story. The assertive and confident presence of Duke, even when staring Jason in the eye, makes the character created by Marcus one of the most badass in the franchise, even if he does have some very particular views on Jason.
Well, that makes me think of a little girl in a pink dress sticking a hot dog through a donut.
While at the diner, we meet Stephen Freeman. Still living his glory days in his Letterman's jacket, he finds out that something a little extra comes with the burger and fries when Diana tells him to stop over at her house after her shift ends. On the way to Diana, Steve picks up a few hitchhikers that want to party at Camp Crystal Lake now that Jason has been blown to bits. Boy, are they wrong. Of course, no matter how different you would make a Friday the 13th film feel, you just gotta have a campfire, sleeping bags, and slaughter. And this scene kills it. As Debbie and Luke have some fun in the tent, Debbie is split in half by Jason. While the final Friday tends to fall on the back half of fans' favorite lists, there is no denying this is one of the best kills in the entire franchise. Seeing this kill uncut and in all of its glory shows that there was a lot of thought put into this film. It wasn't treated as some connector piece. The creatives behind the installment wanted to create something memorable and really push the envelope. Coming up with new and creative kills in a franchise that has done almost everything can be a rarity by the ninth installment. After Jason kills the hitchhikers, he works himself up an appetite as he finds himself at Joey B's, but it looks like he is ordering off the menu, kidnapping Deputy Josh and giving him one of the most sensual shaves that has ever been captured on film. We get a little understanding of what we're in for as an audience. No, I don't mean more naked men tied to a table, but this body hopping concept as Phil goes in for an open mouth Frencher on Deputy Josh. As Diana is on the phone with Jessica, she gets interrupted by a now possessed Deputy Josh. Seeing Jason's reflection in the mirror, Diana realizes Jason has come for her. One of the biggest positives I took away from my watch and rewatch was how much I really love this body hopping element. It has a Lovecraftian aura. Jason always had this supernatural flair about him, especially when we get into that later half of the franchise, but I really love how much the final Friday leans into it. Sometimes films feel like they want to lean into this wacky supernatural aspect, but they pull back and never really achieve what they tease to the audience. In this film, as soon as the idea is introduced, we expand upon it until these events just get wilder and wilder. Steve arrives punctual as always, but is unable to save Diana as he is blamed for her death as Deputy Josh escapes. Innocent until proven guilty isn't a motto in Carpenter County, as Steve is booked for the murder of Diana. On his way to his cell, he catches a glimpse of Jessica and her baby Stephanie, as Steve comes to the realization the Freeman posse just got a little bigger. Getting comfy in his cell, he meets his new neighbor, none other than Creighton Duke, as he asks Steve to lend an ear and a hand. Finding out about the Voorhees lineage, Steve makes an escape to stop the Voorhees family tree from branching out, but not before making a stop to see his baby for the first time.
My baby. It's the first time I've ever been able to touch my baby.
When we talk final boys in the Friday the 13th franchise, it is sort of sacred ground. Everyone is only competing for a silver medal because of how beloved the Tommy Jarvis character is, which you'll get no argument from me. But Stephen, played by John LeMay, certainly hits the mark of being more than a disposable character. The relationship between Jessica and Stephen is another interesting piece in the Jason Goes to Hell puzzle. This relationship, as it develops on screen and the issues between both characters, really display how these people existed prior to Jason showing up and slashing everyone to bits. Steven not knowing he has a baby with Jessica and finding out as he's being accused of Diana's murder is a much deeper story than a lot of the previous Friday the 13th installments. While the story is never fully given a lot of screen time because of Jason's body hopping antics, it remains a compelling piece of the final Friday installment. When Steven arrives at the Voorhees home, he finds a little treat for us Evil Dead fans, which, if you don't like this film, at least give Adam Marcus a few bonus points for adding this little horror nugget in there. As Steve finds out how much of a lousy housekeeper Mrs. Voorhees is, he gets interrupted by newscaster Robert Campbell as he cooks up some fake news, dumping Diana's body off to make a hot news angle. Deputy Josh gives Bobby Boy a newsflash of his own when he feeds him a hell demon like a mama bird. Well, we already talked about Deborah's kill earlier and how that's such a great effect. Deputy Josh becoming the incredible melting man, so to speak, is such a centerpiece of Jason Goes to Hell. As we watch this character disintegrate right in front of us, I almost forgot we were watching a Friday the 13th film. The franchise is littered with great and memorable kills, but nothing quite like this was ever attempted in a franchise that has a very specific voice. Marcus and KB Studios changed the tone with this scene. It is something out of a Hellraiser film or even Cronenberg's catalog. Taking the premise of the slasher equation, then adding in such a strong body horror element really gives the Final Friday its own unique flavor. Once Jason purchases the new downloadable content and puts on his new Robert skin, his first order of business is to go after Jessica. Making his way to see her, Jason's makeout session is interrupted by Steven as they make a quick getaway. Jessica leaves Steven in the dust, but not for long as they are reunited at the police station when Jason stops by for some coffee and donuts. Jessica and Steven escape to get their baby from Joey B's while Jason takes on Crystal Lake's finest. As a kid and watching the final Friday, the scene in the police station followed by the havoc that is unleashed at Joey B's was always my favorite double punch. The portrayal of Jason by the Robert character was always my personal favorite, just from the mannerisms and look. It gave me this creep factor, especially when you see Robert's body start to become deformed after the Jason possession. The diner scene has such a frantic tone with so many deaths happening in memorable ways, it's hard to catch your breath. And then we work up to an even bigger face off. Jessica realizes Duke has taken the baby and wants to have a family reunion at the old Voorhees house. As Jessica arrives to meet Duke, she finds out she's the one that has to put an end to Jason. But ruining her heart to heart with Duke, the police don't need a warrant to show up uninvited. Although Jessica is going to need to see some badge numbers because she thinks one of them might be Jason. Killing Sheriff Landis, Jessica realized it was Randy who was undercover when he tries to possess her baby. Stephen wins Father of the Year when he slashes Randy's throat with Jason's old machete, allowing for the Hell Demon to escape. After doing a little research on the final Friday, I was able to find some footage from the work print that showed a different variation of the Hell Demon. The one we see in the actual film is small and slightly unintimidating. One of the original designs was to give the demon a more imposing size, to the extent that Duke is able to jump on its back. We've already mentioned so much of the great effects work that goes into the film. From Deborah's kill to Deputy Josh melting, Jason Goes to Hell has such a variation in the effects department. Everyone involved in the film didn't hold back when it came to creating a unique installment. As the Hell Demon sneaks into the basement to have a late night rendezvous with Diana, we realize that our Serpent from Hell isn't much of a mood setter, since he's only in the basement for a few seconds before Jason is back in full form. Friday fans finally get what they came for as Jason disposes of Duke rather quickly and looks to unleash some Crystal Lake carnage on Steven and Jessica. Steven takes a pretty hefty beating before Jessica comes to the rescue with the dagger as she drives it right into the black heart of Jason. Finally being taken down by a member of the Voorhees lineage, Jason receives his one-way ticket to hell as the demons from the underground get a little handsy. With Jason finally in hell, Jessica, Steven, and Stephanie enjoy a morning walk at Crystal Lake. But we realize our pal Jason has left one important accessory behind. Jason, already making friends in hell, has a familiar face or glove from the New Line family help him out. As a kid, the final battle always stuck out in my mind when it came to this film. Partly because we finally get to see that goalie with an attitude we're accustomed to in the franchise, but also because Jason had such a distinct look. Having such a great design in Part 7, but I always felt there was something missing with his design in Jason Takes Manhattan. Here we get to see an emphasis on Jason's deformities, with the mask almost melding to his face. When you look at the supernatural factor in the film, this mutated version of Jason complements that idea a little more than the previous versions. He has this almost bloated look to him, which makes sense when you spend a lot of your time being trapped at the bottom of Crystal Lake. And there you have, in a nutshell, Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. From hell serpents crawling out of sliced open necks and into a woman's corpse, to Necronomicons, this film really leans into its tone, trying to bring a whole new feel to the franchise. This film will always be a heated debate between Friday fans. While this film is nowhere near perfect, Adam Marcus and his team did their best to try and resurrect a tired Friday the 13th franchise from the depths of Crystal Lake. Where The Final Friday succeeds from my perspective is how much they lean into the wackiness of the premise and putting an emphasis into those new supernatural elements introduced, focusing on their own tone rather than recycling the formula of, at the time, a 13-year-old franchise. So, horror fans, next Friday the 13th, when you're looking for another chapter to revisit, be adventurous and see what The Final Friday has to offer. But until next time, I'm Luke Janesco, and stay scared.